In order to understand how things like ChatGPT work, we need to understand something about machine learning. Machine learning is a very different way of getting computers to do things than standard programming. If you're learning to program right now, you're probably doing things that look sort of like this. Write a function to uppercase every other letter in a string, starting with the second one. If we write some code to do this in Python, it might look like this. Don't worry if you haven't seen Python before or don't understand it. We're not going to use very much Python in these exercises. I'm just using this as an example. We start off by defining the input as a string, stop staying up so late, as well as a variable I, which we set to 0, and a result string, which we send to the empty string. Then we loop through every letter in the input. And if I mod 2 is 1, that is, if it's an odd numbered character, we add the uppercase version of that to the result. Otherwise, we add the letter itself to the result and increment I. And this gives us this result that uppercases every other letter in the string. The way this worked is we had some input, and we knew as the programmer what we wanted the program to do. So we sat down and we wrote that program, and then it produced the output. But let's go back to the example of Google Translate. How do we write a program to do this? Well, on the surface, it might seem like kind of a similar problem. So let's see if the approach that we had so far can work. I can take an input as a sequence of words. I'd like the Caesar salad, please. And now we're going to try to build the translation in result. So I'm going to loop through the words and try to translate each word into Spanish. So if the word is salad, I'm going to append ensalada. If the word is Caesar, I'm going to append César. If the word is please, I'm going to append por favor. And otherwise, I'm going to append the word itself to the result list. All right. If we run this code, it will say, I'd like the César ensalada, por favor. OK, so we look at this and we're like, oh, man, I messed up. I didn't do this right. I forgot to translate the word the. So let me go quickly add that back in, and we'll append la for the. But this actually isn't always right, because the doesn't always translate as la. And we also should have translated Caesar salad as ensalada César rather than César ensalada. And we didn't even get to I'd like or me gustaría. So it becomes very difficult to write down enough rules to be able to do this kind of complex task of translation. Instead, machine learning allows us to learn these rules from data without us writing them. What is data in this case? Data is pairs of sentences where we have an English sentence and the translation in Spanish that was written by a person. And so we can have a bunch of examples like this that we collect just from things that have already been translated in the world. And even if you don't speak Spanish, you can look at these and start to recognize some patterns. For example, the word salad occurs in the second two examples in English, and the word ensalada occurs in the second two examples in Spanish. So if we're pretending we're kind of a machine trying to learn some patterns here, we maybe can recognize that salad and ensalada might be translations of one another. So this ground truth translation data allows us to understand something about the translation process. So then what machine learning does is it allows us to define a framework where we have an English sentence and we let a system try to translate it into Spanish. And maybe the system does something wrong. And we compare that to the ground truth and we say, you messed up. Then what we do is we have a way of changing the system a little bit. Its behavior is ideally going to be more correct now. Maybe it's not totally correct. Maybe it still messes up las instead of los. So we say, OK, it's still wrong. And we make another update. And now maybe it does the right thing. This process is called training. We repeatedly get this system to make a prediction. Then we compare it to the right answer. And then we make an update to the system to make it more correct. So if we build our system the right way, we don't actually have to define any rules for how this translation works. All we have to do is look at these examples and have the right procedure for updating things. So In contrast to this programming framework where we sit down and write a program to produce the output, instead machine learning takes examples of the input and output themselves and produces the program for us as output. So it will learn from data. And what that allows us to do is it allows us to do things that are much more complicated than what we would have been able to specify ourselves. And we're going to see how that's a key ingredient for the framework that ChatGPT is built on, which is called language modeling. That's the end of this segment.